We're now standing in Yodfat. This really is the beginning of the whole story when we talk about Churban Beit HaMikdash, the destruction of the temple. When we talk about that whole idea, we have to take ourselves back to be able to understand what we're talking about. Remember, before the Romans enter into the country, we have the period which is known as the Hasmoneans. And the Hasmoneans that are here, even though they don't declare in 167 when they come here, Kan Medina Yehudit, this is the Jewish state. Round about after 30 years, people understand that we're in this shvung, we're in this idea of what it means to have a Jewish state. And people are quite happy about it. It's going very well. And if you want, one of the ideas of why the rebellion will be so fierce across the whole country is because when the Romans come in and stamp their authority, the Jewish people have been used to doing things their own way and not the way the Romans want. The Jewish people have been used to being under Jewish government and not under what's known as a Roman prefect or somebody who will come and collect taxes from them, procurator. They've been doing things as they should have done, according to the Jewish law. But the Romans come in here and they start to move in from 63 and everything is going okay until the Mered, which will break out nearly 100 years later in 66 CE. But in order for us to understand what we're doing in Yodfat, you have to go back again, back to those Hasmonean times. The Hasmoneans understood something very important. Even though the whole Hanukkah story takes place around Jerusalem and around what we call present-day Judea, they realized if they want to control the whole country, then people have to move to various different places. They need to make sure they start to set up new communities all over the country. Until this very day, the state of Israel even have understood that concept. Wherever you place your yeshuv, your community, those people become, if you want, your border force, the first line of defense for the borders. And so they moved a lot of the people all the way up north. The Golan is resettled at that time. The Galil has a lot of areas, and that's where we are right now, very high up in the Galil. They have a lot of areas that are going to have new communities. One of those communities is the place that we're in now called Yodfat. But Yodfat won't win its fame in the time of the Hasmoneans. Yodfat's fame will only come much later on. Over 100 years later, after they've settled this area, when a man called Yosef ben Mattityahu, who we know as Josephus Flavius or Flavius, comes to this place over here. This will be the beginning of the great rebellion against the Romans. And if you want, this will be the beginning of the 3 weeks as well. That period running us in from Shiva Asar Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, until Tisha B'Av, until the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. It will all start here. What looks to be a very beautiful place today has a very bloody history. When we look at the destruction of the second temple, the Churban Beit HaMikdash, we think we're dealing with just the area of Yerushalayim itself. But it didn't come out of nothing. There was different rebellions that took place all over Israel. We're now standing on the Roman road, which is also connected to one of those places. Just like it started in the Galil and in the Golan, in places that we'll see, here on the Roman road, this is a place which is very close to a town which is called Jerash, or Chilbut Garash. These names of these places you might never have heard of. That's 4 years before Jerusalem is going to be conquered. Vespasian, the man who will be here just up until the destruction of the temple, until that story that is so familiar to many of us, about Vespasian being told he's going to be the emperor, and he goes off to Rome and he leaves here his son Titus to finish the work and finish off Yerushalayim, finish the work of Jerusalem. Vespasian will come to the area over here. According to a number of archaeologists, the road that we're now seeing, he's going to use, because he has to get to the town itself. Much later on, there'll be a man called Bar Kokhba who will come from the same town, be his birthplace, according to many ideas that we have. Over 1,000 people will be murdered by Vespasian for starting a rebellion in that area. Now remember, the rebellions themselves are all about saving Yerushalayim. This is not about rebelling in order to be able just to save the village. But this is to rebel to stop what will eventually take place, which is the destruction of Yerushalayim. On the road, which if we're going to go this way now, you can see, this is the road which Roman soldiers would walk up. They were coming up here, and it's also connected to something else that we're going to be dealing with. And that is because of the fact that when we look at where we're standing now, we're really in Harei Yehuda, in the hills of Judah. If I was to go westward, I get to the ports, the famous ports of Jaffa, the famous ports of Gaza, the famous ports that were being used, Ashkelon, in order to bring food and supplies to the Roman soldiers. And going up this way, I'm heading towards Yerushalayim. Roads are essential in order for an army to be able to march on, to be able to get to their place. But roads are so much more essential in order to be able to allow the Roman army to continue by bringing up the supplies behind. Without these roads, the Roman army wouldn't have been able to capture Jerusalem. You know, when we look at Yerushalayim, at Jerusalem itself, we know that it's in a place which is very tough for us to understand. There's no trade route in Jerusalem. There's no port anywhere near Jerusalem. It's not a safe place to be able to defend. But Yerushalayim was placed there because of the symbolic and the historical importance of the place, and because of the fact that Zeh HaMakom, it's the place. It's the place where everything started. It's the place where the Beit HaMikdash will be built. The Romans themselves had to get to those places. And in order to do that, they will build roads all over the country. They will basically start building these roads in the time of a man called Herod, the man who eventually will rebuild the Second Temple. But it's going to be taken to a different element and a different, if you want, pace when the Bar Kokhba rebellion is going to be taking place. And in the area that we're now standing in, which is the Judean hills, all of these roads are going to be upgraded, and all of these roads are going to make sure that they can carry the mass amount of people that will go to destroy that rebellion. You know, we hike in Israel in various different places, and when you hike on the Roman roads, you think, wow, amazing, look how beautiful it is, the countryside itself. But so much of our history has two faces. So much of our places, our sites that we have two faces. Face number one is the beauty, but then if we look back, we understand the terrible sorrow. The sorrow of the fact that Jerusalem was destroyed because of roads like the one we're standing on. We know the roads were important because in Masechet Shkalim it talks about the idea of fixing the roads for the pilgrims that would go up to Jerusalem. And we have many roads where we have places that we have mikvaot, including not far from where we are, ritual baths, where people would immerse themselves before going to Jerusalem. But then we have roads that are covered in blood. And those roads take us to a famous idea that we know from Masechet Shabbat, from the tractate that deals with the idea of course, that story that we know of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who when they come to him and say the Romans have built so many different things, and he says they built it all for themselves. Well, they did. They built it for themselves in order to be able to take their troops to the eventual aim, which was to destroy sovereignty of the Jewish people and to destroy the house of God, the Beit HaMikdash. So we stand on a road now, a road that should lead us towards Yerushalayim of once, but the Romans had the same aim. They're going to lead us towards Yerushalayim that they are about to destroy. So we are now standing on top of a pillar, as you can see. This is nicknamed by all the Jerusalemites as Etzba Og Melech Bashan, the finger of the giant that was known as the king of Bashan. Except we have to go back now to understand where we really are. There's very few places that we can say we can touch the temple itself. This most probably was dug in a quarry that was once here in order to be able to be a pillar that would have been part of Temple Mount that we can see over here. There's also another version that was later on for the 6th century that would have been used in the church much later. But if we go to the one that we're talking about with the idea of being part of the Temple Mount that was never taken there for the portico of the Temple Mount itself, we're touching part of our history. We're standing on a part that would have stood on the Beit HaMikdash itself. So off to my left right now is the building which is taking place now in order to bring the students down from Har Tzofim to the center of the city, Betzalel, the Art Academy. When they were digging up the Art Academy here, of course, one of the things that you have to deal with everywhere in Jerusalem when you build is to make sure that you have archaeologists that come in and do an archaeological survey. Very important. Remember, Jerusalem is built on layers like so many other places in this country, and you can't have it that we're going to destroy so much of our heritage. As they dug in Betzalel, all of a sudden, they came across something which was incredible. The walls that we have today of the old city are not the end of the old city from the Second Temple period of time. What they are is there were extra walls, and we'll be at one of them in a few moments. But there was extra walls that they were able to protect the city in various different ways. When the Romans came to destroy the city of Yerushalayim, as we know, they breached the walls of Jerusalem. They stood on a higher part to where the temple was and to where the rest of Jerusalem was, and they catapulted into the area. From the place that we're at now, we have found arrows from the Sikarim, from those people who were protecting Jerusalem, and the rebels of those people who were protecting Jerusalem at the time. And we have found the catapults from those people as well as, of course, vessels and other things that would have been needed by the outer wall itself. This area of the Russian compound today has been identified as the place where the beginning of the destruction took place. Where the beginning, if you want, of the end of sovereignty of Jewish people at that particular time in their homeland happened. So we might be standing now on a pillar which never made it there. But because we're here, maybe it gave us some keys to understand what was going to take place here. Pillar of the Beit HaMikdash, of the portico, and the area where it was breached. Let's go to see the walls now. So we are now standing in a place in the city that probably most of you don't ever come to. But the place that we're standing in is by what's known as Pasmandelbaum, which is behind me now, the American Consulate, which is this way, which is in East Jerusalem. You can quite clearly see as well, if you look over here, the mosque over here, and the Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem, which sit off to my right. We're on the right-hand side of that famous road known as number 1 of Prisham Chanim, which separates, if you want, one side of Jerusalem to the other, and we'll talk about that in a second. This area, though, is important for us when we talk about the Second Temple period. We are walking along the wall that once was here. This was the wall of Yerushalayim. It stretched out to this place over here, and if you make out this area here, you'll notice the structures that would have been here inside this area over here. It was known as the Palva, if you want, the suburbs of Jerusalem. It was actually built originally by Agrippus, and the Caesar Claudius told him to stop it, and he stopped building this area over here. One of the places that we were just at before, which was Etzba of Og Melech Bashan, the finger of Og, we spoke about the idea that where Betzalel are digging is probably where they breached Jerusalem. It's also part of the third wall. It's just up the street from where we are right now. And so we stand here today in this place that we're at, and we remember the valiant fight that people put up to trying to stop the Romans coming into their city. Remember, they're going to come from the north, they're going to come into the city. There's going to be 2 legions up on the area of Mount Scopus. There's going to be another legion trying to get through here. The catapults are going to be raining down on the city. At the same time, there's going to be incredible work that's going to happen here in this city as people are going to dig underneath where they bring in the battering rams, put wood under there, and then they're going to set fire to the wood, and the battering rams will collapse into a hole. They're going to dig tunnels, the people who are here. Ingenious what these people are doing. People who are fighting for Yerushalayim, People who are fighting for revenge from their families that have been killed in the various different conquests of the Romans up until that time. Remember, we're not dealing with 1 month of war. We're not dealing even with 6 days of war that we're going to touch on in a second. We're dealing with 4 years so far, from 66 to 70, that the Jews have put up this fight to try and hold on to their beloved Yerushalayim. You know the end of the story. Unfortunately, the Romans managed to break through these walls, and they do a dive straight towards Har HaBayit, towards Temple Mount. It's funny, you would expect many times that they would dispose of the city first of all, and then go to the central part of the city. But what they do is they know exactly what gives the source of inspiration and the source of strength to the Jewish people. And that at the time was the Beit HaMikdash itself. It's the only place that we in Judaism call holy. We call nothing else holy apart from that mountain. It's the mountain, of course, where we say the world was created from. It's the mountain where Adam's sons, Cain and Hevel, sacrificed their korbanot to Hashem. It's the mountain where Noach also came after the flood. It's the mountain of the Akedah. It's the mountain of Yitzchak, of Yaakov as well. It's all the mountain where Am Yisrael have been focused to. It's the mountain that we pray to every day, to that place itself. The place of Kodesh HaKadoshim, of the Holy of Holies. And it's the place that they knew was the source of what it meant to be a Jew. At least that's what they thought. But that is not going to be the end of the story. We stand now looking over something which is known today called Churban Yehudim, or Churban Yehud, as the Arabs called it. The Chuvah of the Yehudim, the destroyed area where the Jews were. That's what it's still called till to this day. Churban Yehud. It sits in a valley just over Nachal Rephaim, a very beautiful valley that many of us before this whole time period of the Oslo Accords may well remember even hiking parts of it. In the village which is known as Batir by the Arabs. Many of us will be familiar with the more religious neighborhood called Beitar, which is on the other side of the hill, named after this village over here called Batir that we have in front of us over here. Batir, as the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud tells us, is a makeup of 2 words. Bat-tir. Not just Batir, Bet, Taf, Yud, Reish, but Batir. It's also got to do, if you want, with the end of the story. Because Beitar, as we call it, not Batir as the Arabs call it, is going to have a culmination that we know is going to talk about the same day that we talk about the destruction of the first temple and the second temple, the 9th above. But tir, it means by the blade. And the man who will come here, very close to where he was born, round about 4 kilometers from here, is a man known as Bar Kokhba. The rebellion that takes place here between 132 and 135 is going to cause major damage to the Romans. Hadrian, who will be here, is not going to be able to sort out the issues of the Jews. And Bar Kokhba will have much success. In the valley of Elah, Emek HaElah, down the road from where we're standing right now, which is west of where we're standing now, there'll be many caves which are connected to the story of Bar Kokhba. In the distance that we have beyond the Jerusalem hills, it's going to be Midbar Yehuda, the Judean desert, that's going to have much success connected to the Bar Kokhba rebellion as well. As the Romans, when they're traveling along the route that's coming up from the Dead Sea, eventually from Elat or Aqaba at the time, coming all the way up towards Jerusalem, are going to be destroyed time and again. On the Elah Valley, the Jews are going to come out of their caves and they're going to destroy the Romans coming from Europhilopolis, what we call today Bet Guvrin, to this area over here as well, and from the port of Gaza, etc., all the way up the Roman road. But if you want, the culmination all comes over here. Masechet Ta'anit, the tractate of Ta'anit, both in the Bavli and in the Yerushalmi, in the Palestinian or the Jerusalem Talmud, okay, known as the Talmud Yerushalmi, and that one known as Talmud Bavli, the one that's written in Bavel, both describe what takes place in Beitar that we have over here. And for that, maybe we'll move a bit closer inwards so you can see. The village that we have now, which you can see over here, which has been built up over the Chulva. And if you can now make out, I'm not sure what you're able to make out on the camera, but there's a big white house on the right, and on the left-hand side there's a white house with an orange roof. Between there, we can still see remnant of what it was like, that whole fortress area. There was a fortress up here. 2 legions will come to Beitar in 135. They'll arrive here in order to be able to destroy this place over here. That's how many people they had to bring here to be able to destroy the famous Bar Kokhba rebellion. Bar Kokhba will lead his team, whether rightly or wrongly. I'm not going to get into the whole political issue over here of what he did, whether it was correct. There were certain things for sure that were incorrect. But again, read the Talmudic piece and you'll understand it. But I want to focus on what took place at the end over here. Why is it so important for us to remember, and why do we talk about this when we deal with the idea of the 9th of Av? So when we talk about the 9th of Av, one of the things that we're meant to remember is the destruction of this place behind us. By the end of the story, the Talmud Yerushalmi will tell us the rivers of Nachal Rafayim that are continuing down to the Mediterranean Sea will turn red, and the Mediterranean Sea will turn purple with Jewish blood. There'll be so many people killed here, and their bodies will be strewn across the hillside over here. The end of the story we know. Bar Kokhba dies on this hillside. His followers die here. The people, the women, the children are all murdered here. And the Romans have their festivity, if you want, as the final nail in the coffin of the great rebellion which continued into the Bar Kokhba rebellion is finally over. The bodies were left strewn on the hillside over here, as we know from the Talmud as well. But then we are told something a little different, because what are the messages of Beitar? It's such a hard story to be able to tell here. We have the story of Bar Kokhba, who maybe went too far. We have the story of Bar Kokhba, who killed his uncle here. We have the story of Bar Kokhba, who was told that he was going to be the Mashiach by Rabbi Akiva and many of the other sages. He had the potential. And then we have the story of Bar Kokhba, who leads his people into a battle that the eventual end was pretty well known. How are you, Bar Kokhba, with your soldiers here, going to stand up to the might of the Roman army, who have already shown us what they really can do when they put their mind to it? It's a factor of choiceless choices. Maybe you have to do this. I don't know what is meant to be the eventual aim, but what I do know is what the Chazal tell us, our sages tell us. Because we never leave anything on a complete down. We never leave anything on a negative. Even Tisha B'Av has a positive to it. You learn from your mistakes. You learn from doing things history has told you and try and change the course of that. And remember, we can't be left in this solemn time forever. And therefore we have a continuation after Tisha B'Av. The Jewish people never knew how they were going to continue after the destruction of the Second Temple. But we all know the famous story of Yavna. Ten li Yavna v'chachamea. Give me Yavna and its wise people. And we rebuild Judaism again. Out of the complete destruction that we had, we rebuild it. We managed to continue. Our sages come along and tell us that the bodies were not buried here, and they were left to decompose here in the sun. Remember, Tisha B'Av falls in the middle of the summer. But then we have the festival 6 days later called Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, We're not going to go into the whole story of the 15th of Av, but one of the things that we do know from our sages is that people were buried, the people of Beitar were buried on Tu B'Av. Now there are many questions here when the bodies were buried. How many years after? One of the ideas is that Hadrian himself took all the bodies that were in Beitar and built for himself a vineyard 18 miles by 18 miles. And that his vineyards never needed fertilizer because they had the blood. But eventually, one of those things we also remember on the festival of Tu B'Av is that we got to bury these bodies. The Anaf Yosef says a person is demanded to look after his body. And then he describes that a community is demanded for the burial of the bodies. Why is that? So the soul can start its next journey onto the afterlife. And until that time, it can't do that. Maybe the message of Beitar is this. What took place here, I'm not getting into whether it was correct or incorrect. But one of the things that we were able to start after Beitar was our next chapter in the period of this tremendous people, the Jewish people. A chapter that when we stand over here looking over the hills, which connect us so much to our history, but at the same time we see the rebuilding of the city of Jerusalem behind us. Our history, our future, the present, past and future meeting in one place. Remember, you come out of the 9th of Av, out of the 3 weeks, and we start our history again. We start to climb the hill again. Never be dejected and think that Beitar was the end. It was the beginning of another chapter. Just like so many other times, the Crusades, people could have thought was the end of the Jewish people. It was the beginning of a new chapter too. Where there's an end, there's a beginning. Just like we talk about in the Torah, that it goes around on Simchat Torah, we start and we finish and we start on the same day. Same thing. Our history never stops and never starts. We move into the next chapter. And that chapter is the Geulah, the eventual redemption of the Jewish people.